deze. Even kijken. Ja. Volgens mij zou dat goed moeten zijn, toch?
Welcome to the introduction of my PhD defense about a dual flow bioreactor for cartilage tissue engineering. I'm delighted to see so many familiar faces. Let me first introduce my paronyms. On this hand side is Ernst van Kempen, and on this hand side is Ruben Meulenkamp, which are two very good friends of mine. Take a seat, guys. So first, a small announcement. If everybody could turn off the sound of their mobile devices, that would be great. This talk will be in Dutch further. However, the actual defense will be in English. Dus een dubbelstrooms bioreactor voor kraakbeen tissue engineering. Ik ga proberen in 10 minuutjes uit te leggen wat onze rationale was om een nieuw bioreactorsysteem te ontwikkelen. En kort wat onze resultaten waren. Stel, je denkt, ik ga gezellig een middagje sporten. Je verstapt je, je wordt getackeld. In ieder geval, je ligt kermend op de grond. Je knie doet zeer. Wat kan er gebeurd zijn? Nou, een van de dingen die gebeurd kan zijn, is dat het kraakbeen, het weefsel dat over je botten heen ligt in de gewrichten en ervoor zorgt dat de gewrichten zich soepel kunnen bewegen, dat daar een stukje in mist. In dit geval een vrij groot stuk. Op deze foto, wat de binnenkant van de knie is, kun je in wit het kraakbeen zien. En je kunt daar in het midden een... this one, yes. Dit gedeelte is, je kunt het niet heel goed zien, maar dat is roze. Wat het bot is. En dit soort defecten, als we die niet repareren, zullen die leiden tot een ziekte als artrose, osteoartritis in dit geval. Het probleem is dat een kraakbeen niet de capaciteit heeft om zo'n groot defect bij zichzelf te helen. Dus we zullen een manier moeten vinden om buiten het lichaam om kraakbeen te produceren, wat dezelfde functie uit kan oefenen als het natieve kraakbeen. Nou, onze rationale was om het kraakbeen hierin, in deze reactor, centraal te stellen. Nou, als we even een stapje terug gaan, dit is een dwarsdoorsnede van de knie. En ik heb het kraakbeen hier in zwart aangegeven. En als we dan kijken hoe dit kraakbeen gelokaliseerd is, zien we dat dat zich bevindt tussen twee vloeistoffen. Het synoviale vocht in de knie en het subchondrale botvocht in het bot natuurlijk. Dus onze hypothese was, deze twee vloeistoffen die de voedingsstoffen toevoeren aan het kraakbeen, hebben een belangrijke invloed op hoe het kraakbeen gestructureerd wordt. En die voedingsstoffen, de verdeling van deze voedingsstoffen, hebben daar ook een invloed op hoe die kraakbeencellen zich gedragen. Daarnaast is er een ander belangrijk aspect, maar daar ga ik nu niet op in. En dat is dat er druk gezet wordt op het kraakbeen. En een functie van het kraakbeen is dat om die druk te verdelen over het gewricht. En naar het onderliggende bot te transporteren. Dit hebben we ook in het ontwerp meegenomen. Alleen daar ga ik, zoals gezegd, nu even niet op in. Gewoon om de tijd in de gaten te houden. Dus deze twee vloeistoffen. Als we eerst even wat verder inzoomen op kraakbeen, hoe is dat nou eigenlijk gestructureerd? Als we kijken naar de celverdeling, zien we aan de synoviale kant, dus deze kant, zien we een hoge concentratie cellen. En deze concentratie cellen neemt af naarmate je dieper het weefsel ingaat. Als we dan kijken naar de matrix, dus waar is kraakbeen uit, waar bestaat het uit? Welke moleculen? Dan zijn er twee heel belangrijk. Het collageen en de proteoglycanen, wat eiwitten zijn waar suikers aan gekoppeld zijn. En één heel belangrijke zijn de glycosaminoglycanen. Nou, als ik eerst naar de verdeling van collageen ga kijken, dan zien we ook weer dat er een hoge concentratie collageen aan de bovenkant voorkomt. En deze neemt af naarmate je dichter bij het bot komt. Dus er bestaat een gradient van dit molecuul. Als we nou naar de kerks gaan kijken, zien we juist het tegenovergestelde. Er is een lage concentratie kerks aan de synoviale kant en deze neemt toe naarmate je dieper in het weefsel komt. En deze twee gradiënten hebben een belangrijke functie in de functie die kraakbeen in zich geheel uitoefent. Maar hoe ontstaan deze gradiënten nou eigenlijk? Nou, onze hypothese was dat deze gradiënten veroorzaakt worden door gradiënten van chemische moleculen. Zoals water, zuurstof, eiwitten of voedingsstoffen zoals suikers. En die zorgen er dus voor dat die proteoglycaanverdeling is zoals we hem in een natuurlijk kraakbeen vinden. Nou, hoe willen we dit dan buiten het lichaam gaan doen? Nou, daarvoor hebben we dus een reactorkamer ontwikkeld, waarvan je hier de dwarsdoorsnede ziet. En daarin willen we een kamer hebben waarin we het synoviaal vocht na kunnen bootsen. Aan één kant en aan de andere kant het subchondraal botvocht. En deze moeten dus gescheiden worden door dan wel kraakbeen, dan wel kraakbeencellen. Nou, het is heel leuk dat we dat kunnen ontwerpen, maar werkt het ook zoals we dit bedacht hebben? Daarvoor heb ik een aantal computermodellen gemaakt en gekeken of deze een indicatie konden geven hoe deze gradient van, in dit geval, suikers eruit zou zien en of er überhaupt een gradient aanwezig zou zijn. Nou, daarvoor, het volgende plaatje, zoom ik in op dit gedeelte en heb ik ingesteld dat hier een hoge concentratie suiker aanwezig is en hier een lage concentratie suiker. Dus een roodachtige kleur is hoog, blauw is laag. En dan zie je dat er een kleurverdeling is door, in dit geval, het kraakbeen, wat ik hier gemodelleerd heb. Wat er dus op duidt dat er een gradient van deze suikers aanwezig is. En als we dat kwantificeren in het model, zie je ook netjes dat er een afname in de concentratie is. Goed, dit is dus een indicatie, dit is een computermodel. Werkt het ook in het echt? Daarvoor heb ik kraakbeen stukjes, blokjes van een koe gekweekt in dit systeem tussen een hoge concentratie suiker en een lage concentratie suiker. En als we dan na 3 dagen meten wat de suikerconcentratie is in het bovenste gedeelte, midden en onderste gedeelte, zien we een significant verschil tussen het bovenste en het onderste gedeelte van dit kraakbeenblokje. Wat er dus op duidt dat we echt een suikergradient aan kunnen leggen. Maar goed, we willen kraakbeen kweken en daarmee beginnen we met cellen, in dit geval chondrocyten. Hebben dit soort suikerconcentraties, dus lagere suikerconcentraties of verschillende suikerconcentraties, hebben die een effect op het gedrag van cellen? Nou, daarvoor heb ik eerst geïsoleerde cellen, dus daar heb ik kraakbeencellen uit kraakbeen geïsoleerd en losgekweekt in deze welletjes in een hoge concentratie. En als ik dan na 7 dagen kweken, ik zie dat het niet heel erg mooi uitkomt, maar goed, ik heb de matrix blauw gekleurd na 7 dagen en dan zien we dat onder een lage zuurstofspanning en een redelijk lage suikerconcentratie, dat daar lijkt dat een optimale conditie is om matrixaanmaak te stimuleren. Goed, dus het lijkt erop dat kraakbeencellen reageren op verschillende suikerconcentraties. Gaat dit dan ook werken als ik een suikergradient aanleg door een hydrogel waarin deze chondrocyten zijn embed? Dus weer, hier zijn de cellen gelokaliseerd, een hoge concentratie suiker aan de bovenkant, lage suikerconcentratie aan de onderkant. En dan weer, als ik na 7 dagen kweken kijk, waar we de matrix terug kunnen vinden in de 3 verschillende condities die ik getest heb. Dus hoog, laag, zien we 3 verschillende profielen. Dus het lijkt er inderdaad op dat we met een suikergradient het gedrag van kraakbeencellen kunnen beïnvloeden. Goed, dit is allemaal proof of concept. We hebben laten zien dat het mogelijk is om gradient te creëren. En we hebben laten zien dat kraakbeencellen erop reageren. Ik heb ook meerdere of andere soorten gradiënten getest. Deze zullen dadelijk in de discussie wel aan bod komen, neem ik aan. Die laat ik nu alleen niet zien vanwege de tijd. Concluderend kan ik in ieder geval zeggen, ik heb een gevalideerd bioreactorsysteem waarin we dit soort gradiënten kunnen aanleggen. En ik heb laten zien dat als we naar voedingsstoffen kijken, dat we met een suikergradiënt chondrocytgedrag kunnen beïnvloeden. Ik heb dit werk natuurlijk niet alleen gedaan, daarom wil ik alle mensen bedanken waarmee ik samengewerkt heb de afgelopen 4 jaar binnen Developmental Bioengineering en Tissue Regeneration. Alvast in advance wil ik de commissie bedanken dat ze hier willen zijn natuurlijk. De studenten die belangrijk werk voor mij hebben gedaan. Mijn paranimfen dat ze hier willen zijn en mij willen ondersteunen. En natuurlijk mijn familie dat ze hier willen zijn en mij de afgelopen 4 jaar gesteund hebben. And all of you, thank you for coming and listening.
Ladies and gentlemen, I herewith declare this public meeting of the Board of Doctoral Degrees open. I welcome you all, especially the friends, the relatives, colleagues of the candidate, the paranymphs, and of course also a special word of welcome to the guest in our doctoral board, which is Dr. Schultz from the University of Leipzig. Welcome. Dr. Donkelaar from Eindhoven University. Welcome. This is Professor Wijnands from the Medical Center Utrecht, also welcome, and Dr. Martens from the University of Wageningen. May I ask the candidate and his paranel to step forward on the platform. Are you ready?
I think I am.
Okay. Then Dr. Schultz, may I ask you to start the opposition?
Thank you. Tim, congratulations as first to your thesis for your presentation of your research in your 8 chapters, including the discussion. It seems to me it's a very, very interdisciplinary work where you have a massive impact on the quality of the data and the work that you have presented. At first, I have a question on the main part of your thesis belonging to the bioreactor design. You call this bioreactor a dual flow bioreactor. In 3 chapters, chapter 3 to 5, you explain the results of this bioreactor. And my question is, what is the flow in this bioreactor? Is there a flow? And why you are using flow in this bioreactor?
My learned opponent, thank you for your compliments about my thesis. Yes, indeed, in 3 chapters, I do not mention any flow regime. We use a static bioreactor, a static dual compartment bioreactor. I designed this for the simple reason because I lacked a proper control for my flow bioreactor. So I actually have 2 systems, one in which I can induce a flow regime, and one in which I just can culture my constructs in a dual compartment system, so we can distinguish if there would be an effect on a flow, on having a flow in your system, on the creation of the gradients and the behavior and the deposition of the behavior of your cells and the deposition of matrix. So yes, in 3 chapters there is no flow. This was just to determine if there is an effect of these gradients on cell behavior without complicating the system further.
Okay, thank you. Dear candidate, what do you know about the flow situation of the synovial as well as the subchondral bone tissue in a normal knee, for example?
As far as I know, the synovial fluid, the convection induced in the synovial fluid is mainly induced by the compression and mechanical stimulation of the joint. The convection of the subchondral bone, well, that's how I at least imagine it, is how do you say, the blood, or at least parts of the blood that are expelled from the blood vessels that penetrate the subchondral bone, and from there the nutrients can come in contact with cartilage. That's how I imagine the system works in the natural environment.
Dear candidate, in these 3 chapters you are using cartilage explants, but the cartilage or the joint itself is not even cartilage. So what do you think about using a biphasic explant in your bioreactor? What do you expect by such an experiment?
In literature it is described that the subchondral bone has an effect, for example, on the behavior of an MSC laden construct in a defect model. So what they, if I remember correctly, what they did is they made a critical or a defect, a subchondral defect, an osteochondral defect. They loaded this defect with a hydrogel loaded with MSCs, if I remember correctly, and then they, after these experiments, they concluded that the influence of the subchondral bone is needed to have a better repair compared to if you make this defect only in the cartilage zone. I agree with you that we should also include the subchondral bone to make the model more realistic and more representative to the native tissue. However, not to complicate the experiments too much, and to make sure we could distinguish just the cartilage phase and what is happening in the cartilage phase, we choose for cartilage experiments.
Thank you. To candidate, in chapter 5, you're using normoxic as well as hypoxic conditions at 20% as well as 2.5% oxygen concentration. Can you explain the rationale behind in regard to the natural or native situation of oxygen as well as in the synovial fluid and in the subchondral bone?
I actually am not completely sure what the actual oxygen tension is in these fluids. I think it ranges from 1 to about 7% saturation. If I'm no, it's 1 to 7% oxygen tension. So you can imagine that by diffusion, there will be a gradient created through the tissue, depending on the concentration difference between these fluids. But yeah, that depends, and I have not seen really conclusive data on what is exactly how this gradient exactly could look like.
Okay, thank you. Dear candidate, a question relating to chapter 8. You're using a couple of adjuvants, including collagens, hyaluronic acids, as well as platelet lysate. Could you explain why it is a good idea to using platelet lysate to such a culture in the bioreactor?
Well, our lab published previously some data on the chemoattractiveness of platelet lysate on cartilage cultures. If I'm correctly, yes, yeah, it was chondrocytes. So that was actually my starting point to investigate what specific additives to this dextran hydrogel could be useful if we want to develop this hydrogel as a cartilage repair mechanism or therapy. I actually think myself that platelet lysate is not such a good system because it's kind of a black box. You don't know exactly which growth factors are in there, which other substances, and you also don't know in which concentrations. It might be that of a certain growth factor there's a too high concentration and you induce a completely different response than you have intended. So by using collagen, a known concentration of collagen and a known concentration of hyaluronic acid, which are two major components of the cartilage matrix, we can build up this therapy in a more rational way, I would say. The effect of growth factors has been studied a lot and reported a lot in literature. So adding growth factors definitely can enhance the performance of this hydrogel, but this will be an additional step. And yeah, combining the results from chapter 4 with chapter 8 can give us a better insight how cartilage repair can happen in this in such a defect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schulz. May I ask Dr. van Donkelaar to continue the opposition?
Thank you. Dear candidate, I would like to also congratulate you with this nice thesis. When I saw it, when I received it, I was kind of surprised that I see all these bricks with words on it, which made sense, but nowhere it said cartilage. So that surprised me a little bit. But still, it was a very nice thesis, which I read with great pleasure. But of course, I also have a lot of questions. And one question starts in chapter 3, where you explain your model, the model that you use, and basically you give just one equation, which is a Navier-Stokes equation. But I was more interested in what is happening inside the scaffold. And so I was wondering what kind of diffusion model did you use, and also how did you add to that the consumption by oxygen and glucose and growth factors by the cells. Could you say a bit more about that?
My learned opponent, thank you for your questions and for your compliments about my thesis. Let me first comment on that. The white parts of the cover actually should represent the cartilage. And the bricks, as I think you have imagined, represent all the building blocks we still have to investigate to get a proper cartilage tissue formed. Regarding your question, actually, if there is not a equation mentioned for the diffusion, then I have to apologize. That should be there, because what I did is I coupled the Navier-Stokes equation to this diffusion equation. I only don't know by heart which equation this is. I programmed this this model in such a way that it was the simplest model as possible. Regarding the oxygen and glucose consumption rates, let me start with the oxygen, actually. What is reported in literature is that in different zones in cartilage, the cells have a different oxygen consumption rate, which is probably due to the availability of oxygen, or at least the presence of oxygen. So you can find some numerical values for that. So to represent this, I divided the cube, or at least the part that represented a cartilage cube, into 10 different layers. And of these 10, the top two represented the synovial site, in which it is reported that there's a different oxygen consumption rate compared to the lower zones in the middle and deep zone. So I calculated these from literature to fit my model. For glucose, for the glucose consumption rate, these values do not exist. I tried to investigate this a bit more in depth, but I could not completely figure out. In chapter 5, figure 2a, I do show some consumption rates. However, these are of monolayer cultured chondrocytes, so they are not comparable to a 3D system. So what I assume there is that the consumption rate of glucose is homogeneously through the tissue. in my opinion, does not completely represent the natural situation. However, yeah, this.
But do I understand correctly that the top two layers have a different oxygen consumption rate than?
Yeah. So the
okay.
synovial condensation.
Okay. Yeah. So if I look at your gradients, the ones that you compute with your model, they look nice and as you expect, I would say. Then you do a measurement with the glucose on page 44, figure 3. By the way, the top figure says millimole per liter, and the bottom layer says millimole per gram measured.
I could not calculate that to the same values.
Okay, because that makes a factor of 1,000, I would say, which is a lot. But anyway, so what I was most surprised about, what my question is about, is that all the effects that you see, whether they be in chapter 3 on your proteoglycan loss in your tissue, or in chapter 4 on the effects of the growth factors that you have, that they seem to really focus superficially. So they stay in the top layer, and even on page 45, it's a very steep gradient between where you lose your proteoglycans and where all the proteoglycans seems to be present still. And that is not what I would expect from a nice gradient. From a nice gradient, I would expect a gradual change in activity, in whatever. So could you comment on that? Why do you see these steep superficial effects?
Well, I do agree on you, but I think the answer lays in chapter 6, partially, where we look at the penetration of a blue dye into cartilage. And there we also see that this dye seems to be focused in the top zone of the explants. This can mean that within the tissue, as well, it's well known, cartilage is an anisotropic tissue. However, in literature, usually one diffusion coefficient is mentioned. It is well possible that there are different coefficients for the different zones of the tissue, and this can be an explanation why we see different, this not a gradual, but like a cutoff at a certain point in the tissue. However, we use one gel, an agarose gel in chapter 4 and 5, which is homogeneously distributed. I have to say I do not completely have an answer for this phenomena. It can be a diffusion limitation. I don't think it's a nutrient or a deprivation of the molecules that are in there, because I did not see massive cell death in the middle of the construct. So.
Well, thank you. I think, given the time, I will give the word back. But thank you, and I have the feeling that this will be a nice step up for the next person to ask questions. Thank you.
That's a nice word indeed. Thank you, Dr. van Donkelaar. May I ask Professor Wijnands to continue the opposition?
Dear candidate, I really enjoyed your thesis, and I was part of the group that was coming together. So now and then, I think twice a year or so, to see the progress that you made in the biomedical materials project OA control. And I think we, as a group, we did a good job, and I think you contributed really well to this consortium. But your project was quite extensive. I mean, you in your bioreactor, you tried to plug in as many possible aspects of the cartilage and the joint and everything around that you could think of. And therefore, I have the feeling that some aspects stay a little bit superficial, and it's especially these superficial aspects that I would like to dig in a little bit further. And I realized you cannot give it all the in-depth that might be needed, but one aspect is about your experimental setup, and therefore I would like to start in chapter 3. And what you do is you do experiments, and your questioning basically is, okay, how easy can nutritions get to the chondrocytes and then make exchange, either oxygen sugars. Yeah, and therefore you do several things. And one of the things that you did, for instance, in your experiments, you added enzymes to get rid of GAG components. But I was wondering, if you don't add these components, I would think that your construct is even full of enzymes that easily become activated. If you take the cartilage out, you put it in your bioreactor, you would automatically get GAG release, I suppose, because there's a lot of enzymes that become activated immediately. So you get GAG loss anyway. Did you try to map those GAG loss, and if you have any idea how big this GAG loss is? I think it's very important, actually, that you have automatic GAG loss, even without doing these additional enzymes.
My highly learned opponent, thank you for your questions and your compliments. Yes, we did look at it. I actually initially had the same idea, and I wanted to know how stable these cartilage explants were. So what I did was I cultured these squared or cubical explants for up to 28 days in normal culture medium without any enzymes, and looked at the matrix distribution by histology. And then we actually saw that after up to 2 weeks, especially the collagen distribution stayed stable. I cannot completely remember the GAG distribution and GAG loss. However, if there had been significant changes in there, I would have remembered. So, especially up to 2 weeks.
The point, of course, is that when you do histology on a cartilage section, that is not really quantitative. But what you could do is do a simple DMMB assay, for instance, which you are aware of.
Yeah.
And you can do that on the fluid. Yeah, and then you can precisely determine in exact numbers how much of GAG particles come out of your. So you can actually determine that in the fluid. Did you look into this kind of?
We did, and as I said, I cannot completely remember from those experiments what came out, but it has not been significant. Otherwise, we would have looked further into it.
Let me continue a little bit about this, and that is related to the diffusion of, say, the molecules that you're looking at, oxygen and the sugars that go in there. And I have the feeling that there's lots of parameters that determine this diffusion. And the most important ones are, I think, the internal pressure that is in the cartilage. Because as you know, you have the GAGs and then you have water attraction. So you have a lot of internal pressure in the cartilage. So the bigger the internal pressure, the more difficult it is for the molecules to diffuse inside, because then they experience this pressure that they have to overcome. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that is an important aspect. Then when you load the cartilage, of course, you get a pressure gradient that influences how these molecules distribute over the cartilage. Yeah, and the other aspect is that it is the molecules itself that are important, because the molecules have a certain size, they have a certain geometry, and they have a certain charge. Yeah, and that all together gives a sort of what I call steric hindrance that can prevent the diffusion. So depending on what you have there, you get this diffusion, and you get, say, concentrations around the chondrocyte, and then you have an interaction with the chondrocyte. So now I was wondering, what you now do is you run a model, and there's nothing about all these aspects. But the first most important aspect that I can think of are not in the model. So I'm really confused what you get out of that model, because the most important things are not in. It's the mechanics of the cartilage, and that determines the fluid flow in the cartilage. You know what I'm?
I agree. However, I try to keep the model as simple as possible, but also as representative within this simple assumptions. So of course we took into account the density of the cartilage, which is determined by the molecules or the structure of the components of the matrix. So what you explained is partly in there. I agree with you, it could have been more extensive, but then also your model becomes more extensive. And I chose to develop a simple model which could give us an outcome that is as representative as possible.
Let me just be the advocate of the devil here a little bit more. And so if you try to make a model, you would like to have it as simple as possible, but with the most important aspects in. So if I would claim that this model would not help you to get the most important aspects of the interaction between the molecules and the chondrocytes, what you want to find out, then what would you say? What would you say? Well, I think it's still valuable, or should we really aim for the next step of modeling where you have, say, the compression and the internal pressures in the cartilage represented?
If you want to go into more depth about cartilage modeling, you should really focus more on that. And I wanted to combine simple computational modeling with experimental data.
Okay, and fine enough. Is there still place for one more?
I'm sorry, but I think we have to continue.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Because I guess it takes much more discussion.
I might get a second round then.
No.
Okay, thank you.
We'll see. We'll see. Thank you, Professor Wijnands. May I ask Dr. Martens to continue?
Yes, thank you. Dear candidate, I would also like to congratulate you with your thesis, which I read with much interest. I'm especially pleased to be here because I was also at the start of your career in bioreactors and tissue engineering as one of the supervisors of your MSc thesis. And as you may know, I'm much in favor of using controlled bioreactors to study cell systems, and you will not be surprised that most of my questions are on chapter 5 of your thesis. I think this is a very nice chapter because you first look at the effects of glucose on individual cells in the absence of the gradients, and then try to translate that to the situation with gradients. Still, I have a question also on that first part, on figure 2. I was wondering, because there are rates in this figure, I was wondering what the final concentrations of glucose and lactic acid were in these experiments. Or, now let me be more specific, because I can imagine that you cannot remember the exact numbers. Were the glucose concentrations 0 at the end?
My learned opponent, thank you for your questions and your compliments. We have had already some discussions about these figures. No, let me rephrase. In the lowest glucose concentrations, at least the starting concentrations, which I mentioned, there the glucose was deprived. However, in the 20 millimolar glucose concentration, there was still glucose present after culture.
Was this a lot, or was it?
I can't remember.
I was just wondering whether it could influence the effect you see, this change in glucose concentration over time.
I think it will. Actually, the moment the cells sense that the nutrients get deprived, they either switch to another nutrient, I can imagine, or they change their metabolic activity too.
Yeah, and maybe a bit in relation to that, then there was something else which struck me in this figure, and that is when you look at the GAG production rate. And you state in your thesis that glucose is very important for GAG formation. It's one of the building blocks. It's probably on the outside of your thesis. Yet, under hypoxia, you see that at a concentration of 0 glucose, you still get GAG formation. So my question is, should there also be something else on the outside of your thesis? Or?
Probably. This the medium I used, I cultured the condocytes in, also contained pyruvate, which is a smaller sugar than glucose. It might be possible that they use this as a precursor, although I would not completely know how, but it could be possible. It might, was there glutamine? Maybe in the medium there was glutamine, but I did not add it.
Okay.
But yeah, they can use different molecules to enter the Krebs cycle.
Yeah. Is this something which should be taken along in the future to look at gag formation, or would it not be physiologically not so relevant? Is there anything known about that?
As far as I know, there's not much known about it. However, as you can see from figure 2a in chapter 5, the production rates compared to the consumption rates at this particular condition are not very efficient compared to the others. So I would say it's not the best option.
No. Okay, thank you. Then I would like to go to the gradients. And this was the cells. The next step is the gradients. And one of the things which struck me in figure 3 is that figure 3b and c do not seem to comply with each other. In terms that in figure 3c you see no effect on total gag, while in figure 3b you see an effect. Can you explain that? Or is this?
What I could think of is that the gags produced were in so little quantities, as you also can see from figure A in that figure, that it was on the edge, on the low side of the assay we did to measure them. So we cannot really distinguish with quantitative assays between the conditions. I think a longer time period, the culture period, could answer this question better. So there's a possibility for more matrix deposition.
I wonder whether that's also the same thing then with let's see figure 5, because there I also see this difference in staining and in what you actually measure in figure 3c.
Yeah. And I think the same applies here. I think it also has a little bit to do with how I divided the cubes for analysis. So when I dissect or separated the top, middle, and bottom of each cube, this could also have influenced or biased a bit the results. However, I think it's an interesting indication where these gradients could.
But still, I mean, if you look at figure A and B, you see a very distinct gradient with the middle zone, which is clearly less well stained than the outer zones, at least as soon as you have glucose also on the other side. While in your measurements, you do not see that back per DNA. And I thought whether cell proliferation could also be something which is important there. Could you comment on that? And because in figure 3c you express the gag content per DNA, so per cell in principle.
I don't have the individual DNA data I don't know them by heart. In principle, we used a differentiation protocol, so the cells should not be stimulated to proliferate and really go into a differentiation pathway. However, you cannot exclude it. I cannot definitely say that they did not proliferate. You could do a EDU a proliferation assay for this to really determine if they are proliferating at the periphery, for example, of the construct.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Is there time for another question?
For a very short question and short answer.
Well, that's on consumption rates. If you look in chapter 3, on the consumption rates for, you took for glucose and oxygen, there's a huge difference in between these two. It's a factor 10 to the 5th or something like that. Can you comment on that? How is that possible in a construct that this difference is so big?
Sorry, this was on chapter?
In chapter 3. In chapter 3 you give consumption rates. I'm afraid the question gets longer now. You have consumption rates for glucose per cube per second and for oxygen per cube per second. And there's a huge difference in between these two. Is that something which is really occurring in cartilage, or?
Well, it is known that chondrocytes only use a very small amount of oxygen for their survival and their maintenance. So it could be lying in there, but that I cannot say for sure.
Okay, I will come back to that after the meeting.
Yes. Needs further discussion as well, as far as I see. Thank you, Dr. Martin. So, can I ask Professor Van Donschot to continue the opposition?
Yes. Yeah, I need to put on my cap. Yeah, dear candidates, I would like to congratulate you too, and also your promoters for this, the appearance of your thesis. And I liked it very much, but of course it brings always up more questions than answers. So I have many of them, and I'm surprised a little bit that nobody is asked about the design of the bioreactor, and because you give a historic overview basically. And if I look at cartilage, I see, you know, if you look at the collagen, you see at the superficial layer, the collagen is oriented according to the surface, and that must have, due to the sliding, I guess, you know, it must have been due to sliding. And of course, all our joints are moving and slide a lot. And I see the historic overview, and I see the bioreactor of Weimer et al., and that has sliding, and that looks like a knee to me. And then you bring up the next step, and then you just ignore that. And then I wonder, why is that? So don't you think that sliding would be important, or does your bioreactor looks more like a kind of a knee, because you're kind of focusing on knee applications, than, for example, the Weimer bioreactor?
My highly learned opponent, thank you for your compliments and your questions. I agree with you. It is not physiologically, or my bioreactor design is not physiologically as representative as could be. However, the bioreactor design which you mentioned is also not. And I think these two designs actually should be combined. So we have this dual compartment or dual flow to create the gradients, but also have this articulating motion to simulate better the movement which happens in your joints. You mentioned specifically the sliding, and one of the committee members actually in his group also designed a bioreactor in which they actually have a physical sliding, and there they actually also see, especially on collagen orientation, if I'm correct, they see an effect of this sliding. So yeah, it is important. We have thought about it. However, we first wanted to validate this dual compartment design, and then take the compression modules a step further to be able to induce either the sliding or articulation, what suits the current design best. Yeah. We have thought about that. We actually have designed this, but not put this in reality
Okay.
yet.
Well, as member of the biomechanical department, I would be happy to work with that design and help each other out. But what you also do, for example, is the loading magnitude is, I think, 1/4 of a megapascal, 0.25 megapascals, and you later on change that to maybe 1 megapascal or 0.5, and 0.25 megapascal is really very low, because it's at least 1 order of a magnitude lower than what physiologically happens. So why that choice?
Well, this actually comes from previous experiments in which we used hydrogels, and these hydrogels are much weaker, so you cannot load them as much as native cartilage. So in this way, yeah, you have to build this up. You can increase your loading according to the matrix deposition, and if your matrix deposition is less than what you expect, you might overload your construct.
Okay.
So I think that is one of the reasons to start
It shouldn't
low.
be, of course, the hydrogel. You know, that you choose a different loading condition, but it should, you know, because in vivo, then the hydrogel will never work, right?
That would depend on the integration with the surrounding tissue, I think.
I think I have to finish here.
Yes,
I give
that's a
the
good
word back to the
conclusion.
director. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor van Donsveld. May I ask Professor de Boer to continue the opposition?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dear candidate, congratulations on your thesis. I'm a big fan of implementing technology in biological sciences, so I read your thesis with a lot of enthusiasm. Yet I would like to go to actually a technical detail of your experiment, which is on page 65, if you can have a look at the figure number 2A. It's the where you describe a system where you use transfected cells to measure the activity of winds. But I was sort of struggling to interpret the data in that figure. So first of all, the design of the bioreactor was not completely clear to me. Is it true that you have agarose cubes with cells in them, and you have medium on top and you have medium on the bottom? The medium on the top, is that exposed to the outside air or not?
Yes,
it
partly.
Is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is a possibility for the surrounding or the ambient air to flow in.
Exactly, but not in the reservoir in the bottom. So this 10 ml that you talk about.
That is also partly exposed to the ambient air.
It's partly because in your thesis you say that the culture plates produce polycarbonate, which is impermeable for oxygen. So
yeah, so there's actually only ambient air exchange on the top, and both medium compartments are in this static bioreactor are exposed to ambient air.
Yeah. So based on that, you claim that there's an oxygen gradient, which actually even influences the readout of the luciferase assay. In my own experience, I've seen that if you take agarose cubes as thick as 1 centimeter, you have 13 millimeters.
These
is that right between the two liquids? So the height of the
no. That's in these bioreactors is 4 millimeters.
4 millimeters. So an alternative could be that there's not actually an oxygen gradient from top to bottom, but it could also be that the oxygen concentrations in the middle of the cubes is actually the lowest of them all because of the consumption of the cells, which take their oxygen from either from the top or from the bottom reservoir. Does that fit the readout that you see in your luciferase assay?
My highly learned opponent, thank you for your question. This could very well be, I agree, but I think this also shows the complexity of the system, although we try to design it as simple as possible. Within this system, you create maybe unexpected gradients. I hypothesized that this could be due to oxygen, and how this influences cell behavior, I do not completely know. What I just understood from literature is that oxygen tensions or different oxygen concentrations can have an influence on these pathways.
Yeah,
so
that's also
that's
what
I
mentioned.
understood.
So if I look at figure 3A, and I see top, middle, and bottom, and then I take the right panel, XX, which I assume means
that there's no
added growth factors. That's sort of your baseline result, and there you can clearly see that in the middle, the luciferase activity is the lowest of them all. So what also strikes me is if you then look at the middle part where the
Thank you very much, Master of Ceremony. May I ask the candidate and his parliament to return to your seats in the auditorium? With this, I adjourn this meeting of the Board of the Doctoral Students for consultation by the committee.